The dispute begins. Captain Layla Johnson stepped off the military transport and onto the bustling tarmac of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. After 6 months of intense deployment in a conflict zone, the familiar hum of civilian life felt surreal. She breathed deeply, savoring the transition from the tense atmosphere of the battlefield to the relative calm of the airport. Her military uniform, adorned with commendations and medals, marked her as a distinguished figure, but the wariness in her eyes revealed the emotional and physical toll of her service. As she walked through the terminal, the bright lights and polished floors contrasted sharply with the gritty terrain she had recently left behind. The airport was a hive of activity, people rushing to their gates, families reuniting, and the distant echo of announcements over the PA system. The holiday season had just begun, and the terminal was filled with the buzz of excited travelers. Captain Johnson's journey home was one of great anticipation. She had spent months away from her family and friends, and now the prospect of reuniting with loved ones and the promise of a well-deserved break filled her with a sense of relief and joy. She clutched her boarding pass and made her way toward the gate, her pace steady but purposeful. The boarding process was well underway, and Captain Johnson noticed a stark division between the two classes of passengers. First class, a realm of luxury and exclusivity, was separated from the economy class by a velvet rope and a team of attentive staff. The first-class cabin was a vision of comfort, plush seats, gourmet meals, and a sense of tranquility that starkly contrasted with the more utilitarian setup in economy. As she approached the first-class section to board, Captain Johnson was greeted by a stern-faced flight attendant who glanced at her boarding pass and then at her uniform. Without a word, the attendant motioned her towards the economy line. Captain Johnson's heart sank as she realized the implications of this subtle yet unmistakable gesture. Meanwhile, in first class, Mr. Robert Sinclair, a wealthy businessman in his early 50s, lounged in his premium seat. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he exuded an air of entitlement. His face was etched with a mixture of boredom and disdain as he perused a financial magazine, seemingly disconnected from the world around him. The luxury of first class, with its wide seats and personal service, appeared to be a fortress that shielded him from the everyday realities of others. As Captain Johnson made her way past the velvet rope, Mr. Sinclair's gaze followed her. His eyes narrowed with a flicker of irritation. He was not accustomed to such intrusions into his exclusive domain. His sense of superiority was palpable, and his prejudiced beliefs, though not immediately apparent, began to surface. The moment of confrontation came when Captain Johnson, upon reaching the boarding area, was halted by the flight attendant and directed to the economy class. She approached Mr. Sinclair, her posture erect and her expression calm despite the indignation she felt. She was used to dealing with difficult situations with grace, a skill honed over years of military service. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I have a valid first-class ticket." Mr. Sinclair looked up from his magazine, his expression one of mild surprise and then irritation. He adjusted his designer glasses and regarded Captain Johnson with a mix of condescension and disdain. "I don't believe that's the case. This is first class. We don't have room for everyone here, especially not." His words trailed off as he glanced at her uniform. His face betrayed a flicker of bias, an unspoken judgment that Captain Johnson could easily perceive. It wasn't just about the seat, it was about a deeper, more ingrained prejudice. "I'm sorry, but this seat is reserved," he continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "If you have a problem with your seat assignment, you'll need to sort it out with the flight attendants." Captain Johnson's eyes met his with a calm resolve. She could feel the weight of the moment, the silent battle of dignity versus discrimination. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and retrieved a small folded note. With a measured gesture, she extended it towards Mr. Sinclair. "This is for you," she said quietly, her voice holding a layer of restrained emotion. "Please read it when you have a moment." Mr. Sinclair took the note with a look of bemusement. "I'm not interested in any notes. I prefer to keep things as they are." Captain Johnson's expression remained composed. "I understand, but please just read it." With that, she turned on her heel and walked towards the economy section, her steps deliberate and her back straight. She had chosen not to escalate the situation further, leaving the confrontation behind as she settled into her assigned seat. As Captain Johnson took her place in economy, she glanced back once more. Mr. Sinclair was already engrossed in the note, his initial skepticism evident. The flight attendants, who had witnessed the brief exchange, moved with a quiet efficiency, their eyes following Captain Johnson with a mix of sympathy and respect. The note she had handed him was a small piece of paper, but it carried the weight of her experiences and the essence of her service. Its impact on Mr. Sinclair was yet to be seen, but for Captain Johnson, the act of delivering the note was a testament to her strength and resolve. The plane's engines roared to life, and as the aircraft began to taxi down the runway, Captain Johnson looked out the window, lost in her thoughts. She knew that the journey home was not just a physical transition, but a profound shift in her life, a chance to reconnect, reflect, and move forward. Little did she know that the simple note she had handed to Mr. Sinclair would set in motion a series of events that would challenge perceptions and spark a journey of personal transformation for both of them. He note. As Captain Layla Johnson settled into her economy seat, the hum of the aircraft's engines gradually masked the ambient sounds of the bustling airport. Despite the comforting vibrations of the plane's interior, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The small act of handing the note to Mr. Sinclair had been a conscious choice, one born from a deep well of experience and sacrifice. Captain Johnson's thoughts drifted back to the grueling months she had spent in a conflict zone. She remembered the relentless heat, the constant vigilance, and the palpable sense of camaraderie among her fellow soldiers. Each day had been a test of endurance and bravery, and each night had been a solemn reflection on the lives lost and the challenges faced. Her uniform, decorated with medals and ribbons, was not just a symbol of her achievements, but a reminder of the weight of responsibility she bore. The note she had written was her way of bridging the gap between her experiences and Mr. Sinclair's world, a world that seemed so distant from the harsh realities she had faced. As she had penned the note earlier in the airport, she'd have thought about the countless soldiers who had served with honor and returned home to find their sacrifices unrecognized or misunderstood. It was a reflection of her commitment to her country and a plea for empathy and respect. In the confined space of the airplane, Captain Johnson took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. She felt a mix of frustration and hope. Frustration at the narrow-mindedness she had encountered and hope that her note might spark a change in perspective, even if just for one person. She glanced at the back of the seat in front of her, lost in thought. Her fingers still tingled from the brief moment of confrontation. Meanwhile, Mr. Robert Sinclair sat in the luxury of first class, a bubble of opulence amidst the mundane travel experience. The plush seat beneath him and the refined ambience of the cabin were a stark contrast to the economy section. As he glanced at the note handed to him, his initial reaction was one of irritation. The note had been thrust into his hand with a sense of urgency that he found mildly insulting. His sense of entitlement was irked by the intrusion into his comfort zone. At first, Mr. Sinclair dismissed the note with a wave of his hand. His mind was already preoccupied with business matters and personal concerns. He had been enjoying a moment of peace, away from the pressures of his corporate life, and he resented this unexpected interruption. The note seemed to him like a minor inconvenience, a small irritant that disrupted his solitude. However, curiosity eventually got the better of him. The note had a certain gravity to it, and despite his initial resistance, he found himself intrigued. He unfolded the paper with a deliberate slowness, as if hoping to dismiss it as insignificant. The note was written in neat, deliberate handwriting, each letter carefully formed. As he began to read, the words unfolded a story far removed from his usual sphere of experience. The note was a heartfelt letter from Captain Johnson, detailing her journey and the essence of her service. It began with a brief introduction. "Dear Sir, if you are reading this note, it means that I have been directed to my assigned seat in economy while you continue to enjoy the privileges of first class. I wanted to take a moment to share a part of my story with you." Captain Johnson went on to describe the realities of her deployment, the challenges she had faced, and the camaraderie that had sustained her through the hardest times. She spoke of the long hours, the moments of fear and courage, and the profound sense of duty that had driven her. She recounted the loss of friends and the unwavering commitment to a cause greater than herself. "Every day, I have fought not just for my country, but for the ideals of equality and respect. It's a fight that extends beyond the battlefield and into every corner of life. It's about recognizing the worth of every individual, regardless of their background or status." The letter also contained a poignant reminder. We all have different paths and experiences, but the essence of humanity binds us together. I hope that by sharing a piece of my journey, you might reflect on the values of respect and understanding. As Mr. Sinclair read the note, his initial skepticism began to wane. The words were simple yet powerful, conveying a sense of vulnerability and earnestness. He found himself confronted with the stark contrast between the luxurious surroundings of first class and the real-world sacrifices described in the letter. The note was not just a plea for respect, it was a reflection of a life dedicated to service and sacrifice. His irritation began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of discomfort. The note had forced him to confront his own biases and the unjust attitudes he had held. The internal conflict was palpable. He was a man accustomed to privilege and comfort, and now, faced with the raw reality of Captain Johnson's experiences, he found himself questioning the fairness of his own actions. Mr. Sinclair's mind raced as he processed the letter. The initial dismissal of the note as a trivial annoyance had given way to a deeper reflection. The stark contrast between his cushioned existence and the harsh realities described in the note was unsettling. He grappled with a mix of guilt and introspection, realizing that the note had opened a window into a world he had largely ignored. As the aircraft climbed steadily into the sky, Mr. Sinclair's internal battle continued. The note had left an indelible mark, challenging his perceptions and forcing him to reevaluate his own attitudes. What began as a minor inconvenience had transformed into a moment of profound self-examination, a moment that would lead to unexpected changes and revelations. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the start of in-flight services, but Mr. Sinclair remained lost in thought. The note had set into motion a series of reflections that would soon have far-reaching consequences, both for him and for Captain Johnson. A turning point. As the plane ascended into the sky, the mood in the first-class cabin was noticeably different from when Captain Johnson had first boarded. The air of exclusivity and detachment that had previously enveloped the space now seemed to crackle with a new energy. The source of this shift was the note that Mr. Robert Sinclair had received from Captain Johnson. Its impact began to ripple through the cabin, affecting both passengers and crew. The first sign of change came when Mr. Sinclair, after a long pause, folded the note and placed it on the tray table in front of him. He glanced around the cabin, as if seeking to gauge the reactions of those around him. The note had not only disturbed his sense of entitlement, but had also created a subtle undercurrent of curiosity among the other passengers. They had overheard fragments of the conversation between Mr. Sinclair and Captain Johnson, and now the note itself was the subject of whispered discussions. In the seat across the aisle, Miss Emily Carter, a successful entrepreneur known for her philanthropy, had been observing the exchange with keen interest. She had noticed Mr. Sinclair's growing agitation and had seen him reading the note. Curiosity piqued, she leaned over and asked, "Is everything all right? You seem quite affected by that note." Mr. Sinclair hesitated, then reluctantly shared a few details with her. As Miss Carter read the note herself, her eyes widened. The message was both moving and disquieting, and she found herself drawn into the narrative of sacrifice and respect that Captain Johnson had conveyed. Her reaction was one of profound reflection. She had long championed the causes of equality and respect, but had rarely been confronted with such a personal account of those values in action. The ripple effect of the note's content quickly spread through the first-class cabin. Other passengers, initially indifferent to the interactions in the cabin, now engaged in hushed conversations about the letter's implications. The atmosphere shifted from one of detached luxury to a more introspective ambience. The note had acted as a catalyst, sparking discussions about privilege, duty, and the often overlooked sacrifices made by those who served in the military. In the midst of this growing awareness, Mr. Sinclair's internal struggle deepened. He sat in silence, grappling with the content of the note and the mirror it held up to his own attitudes. He began to reflect on his behavior and the prejudices he had harbored. The luxurious surroundings of first class, once a symbol of his success and entitlement, now seemed to mock the very ideals of fairness and respect that Captain Johnson's letter had highlighted. The note had done more than challenge his beliefs. It had exposed the shallow underpinnings of his sense of superiority. Mr. Sinclair's reflection went beyond surface-level irritation. He delved into a profound self-examination. The letter had provided him with a glimpse into the life of someone who had endured hardship and sacrifice for a greater cause. It was a stark contrast to his own comfortable existence, and he found himself questioning the value he had placed on his own privileges. As the flight progressed, Mr. Sinclair's thoughts became increasingly focused on the themes of equality and respect. He began to recognize the discomforting truth about his own biases and the impact of his actions on others. The realization that he had treated Captain Johnson with less respect than she deserved was a bitter pill to swallow. The note had opened his eyes to the broader implications of his behavior and the systemic issues that underpinned such interactions. Gradually, Mr. Sinclair's perspective began to shift. He started to see beyond his initial irritation and began to appreciate the broader message of the note. The letter was not just a personal plea, but a reflection of the broader societal issues related to respect and equality. Mr. Sinclair's growing awareness led him to a place of genuine remorse and a desire to make amends. The turning point came when Mr. Sinclair resolved to take action. He knew that acknowledging the injustice and addressing it in a meaningful way was crucial. He decided to speak with the flight attendants and request a change in his behavior. He wanted to rectify the situation not just for himself, but to set a precedent for others. His plan was to use his position and influence to advocate for greater respect and understanding. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Mr. Sinclair approached the flight attendants with a new resolve. He requested their assistance in arranging a gesture of goodwill towards Captain Johnson. He wanted to make amends for the way he had treated her and to ensure that she felt appreciated and respected. His request was met with surprise and curiosity, but the flight attendants, having witnessed the impact of the note, were supportive of his initiative. Mr. Sinclair also began to formulate a broader plan. He wanted to leverage his influence to support veterans and active military personnel in a more substantial way. He began to consider ways to use his resources to contribute to organizations that supported those who had served their country. The note had not only changed his view of the current situation, but had inspired him to make a tangible difference. The realization of the need for change was not confined to Mr. Sinclair alone. The conversations sparked by the note continued to reverberate through the cabin. Passengers who had initially been indifferent now engaged in discussions about the values of respect and equality. The note had not only impacted Mr. Sinclair, but had also created a moment of collective introspection among those who had witnessed the unfolding events. As the flight continued, the atmosphere in first class was transformed. The note had served as a catalyst for change, prompting reflections and actions that extended beyond the confines of the aircraft. The ripple effect of Captain Johnson's heartfelt message had begun to reshape attitudes and inspire a commitment to greater respect and understanding. The ripple effect of the note's content quickly spread through the first-class cabin. Other passengers, initially indifferent to the interactions in the cabin, now engaged in hushed conversations about the letter's implications. The atmosphere shifted from one of detached luxury to a more introspective ambience. The note had acted as a catalyst, sparking discussions about privilege, duty, and the often overlooked sacrifices made by those who served in the military. In the midst of this growing awareness, Mr. Sinclair's internal struggle deepened. He sat in silence, grappling with the content of the note and the mirror it held up to his own attitudes. He began to reflect on his behavior and the prejudices he had harbored. The luxurious surroundings of first class, once a symbol of his success and entitlement, now seemed to mock the very ideals of fairness and respect that Captain Johnson's letter had highlighted. The note had done more than challenge his beliefs. It had exposed the shallow underpinnings of his sense of superiority. Mr. Sinclair's reflection went beyond surface-level irritation. He delved into a profound self-examination. The letter had provided him with a glimpse into the life of someone who had endured hardship and sacrifice for a greater cause. It was a stark contrast to his own comfortable existence, and he found himself questioning the value he had placed on his own privileges. As the flight progressed, Mr. Sinclair's thoughts became increasingly focused on the themes of equality and respect. He began to recognize the discomforting truth about his own biases and the impact of his actions on others. The realization that he had treated Captain Johnson with less respect than she deserved was a bitter pill to swallow. The note had opened his eyes to the broader implications of his behavior and the systemic issues that underpinned such interactions. Gradually, Mr. Sinclair's perspective began to shift. He started to see beyond his initial irritation and began to appreciate the broader message of the note. The letter was not just a personal plea, but a reflection of the broader societal issues related to respect and equality. Mr. Sinclair's growing awareness led him to a place of genuine remorse and a desire to make amends. The turning point came when Mr. Sinclair resolved to take action. He knew that acknowledging the injustice and addressing it in a meaningful way was crucial. He decided to speak with the flight attendants and request a change in his behavior. He wanted to rectify the situation not just for himself, but to set a precedent for others. His plan was to use his position and influence to advocate for greater respect and understanding. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Mr. Sinclair approached the flight attendants with a new resolve. He requested their assistance in arranging a gesture of goodwill towards Captain Johnson. He wanted to make amends for the way he had treated her and to ensure that she felt appreciated and respected. His request was met with surprise and curiosity, but the flight attendants, having witnessed the impact of the note, were supportive of his initiative. Mr. Sinclair also began to formulate a broader plan. He wanted to leverage his influence to support veterans and active military personnel in a more substantial way. He began to consider ways to use his resources to contribute to organizations that supported those who had served their country. The note had not only changed his view of the current situation, but had inspired him to make a tangible difference. The realization of the need for change was not confined to Mr. Sinclair alone. The conversations sparked by the note continued to reverberate through the cabin. Passengers who had initially been indifferent now engaged in discussions about the values of respect and equality. The note had not only impacted Mr. Sinclair, but had also created a moment of collective introspection among those who had witnessed the unfolding events. An unexpected gesture. As the plane soared high above the clouds, Mr. Robert Sinclair found himself enveloped in a newfound sense of purpose. The note from Captain Layla Johnson had stirred something profound within him, and he was determined to make amends for his earlier behavior. He had resolved to address the situation directly and ensure that Captain Johnson received the respect she deserved. Mr. Sinclair rose from his seat with a sense of urgency, his mind focused on his plan. He approached the flight attendants, who were busy with in-flight service, their movements fluid and practiced. With a deep breath, he caught the attention of one of the senior attendants, a woman named Sarah, who had been overseeing the cabin with a calm professionalism. "Excuse me," Mr. Sinclair began, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of nervousness. "I'd like to make a request regarding the seating arrangements." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued by the unusual request. "Certainly, sir. What can I assist you with?" Mr. Sinclair explained the situation with a newfound sincerity. I had a change of heart regarding the seating of Captain Johnson, who is currently in economy. I believe she deserves to be in first class, and I would like to offer her my seat." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She had observed the initial interaction between Mr. Sinclair and Captain Johnson and was aware of the tension that had transpired. The request was unexpected, but the sincerity in Mr. Sinclair's voice left no room for doubt. "I appreciate your willingness to make this gesture," Sarah said, her tone respectful. "I will need to coordinate with the rest of the crew to arrange the change. Please give me a moment." As Sarah walked away to make the necessary arrangements, Mr. Sinclair's sense of anticipation grew. He knew that his gesture was not just about giving up his seat, but also about acknowledging the value and sacrifice of someone who had served their country. The gesture was symbolic, but it was also an attempt to rectify his earlier mistake. The process of moving Captain Johnson to first class was handled with efficiency and discretion. Sarah and her colleagues worked swiftly to make the necessary arrangements. They approached Captain Johnson, who was seated in economy, with a courteous and respectful demeanor. "Captain Johnson," Sarah began, "we have an update regarding your seating. Mr. Sinclair has requested that you be moved to first class. We've arranged for you to take his seat, effective immediately." Captain Johnson looked up from her book, her expression one of bewilderment. She had not expected any changes, let alone such a significant gesture. Her initial reaction was one of surprise, followed by a wave of gratitude. "Are you sure? I don't want to cause any inconvenience." Sarah smiled reassuringly. "It's no inconvenience at all. Mr. Sinclair feels that this is the right thing to do, and we're happy to facilitate the change." As Captain Johnson made her way to the front of the cabin, she was met with curious glances and subtle nods of approval from other passengers. The transition was smooth, and the atmosphere in first class shifted as she took her seat. The luxurious surroundings were now juxtaposed with the genuine gratitude and humility that Captain Johnson carried with her. When Captain Johnson settled into her new seat, she was greeted by a warm, inviting ambience. The plush seat, the attentive service, and the refined surroundings were a stark contrast to her earlier experience in economy. As she adjusted to her new environment, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: surprise, relief, and a deep sense of appreciation. Mr. Sinclair had remained in his seat until Captain Johnson had been comfortably settled. Once she was in place, he approached her with a genuine, albeit somewhat awkward, apology. "Captain Johnson, I want to apologize for my earlier behavior. Your letter had a profound impact on me, and I hope this gesture shows my respect for your service." Captain Johnson looked at Mr. Sinclair with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair. I appreciate the gesture, and I hope it reflects a broader understanding of the sacrifices made by many." The public response to Mr. Sinclair's change of heart was immediate and positive. Passengers in first class, who had witnessed the earlier exchange and the subsequent gesture, began to murmur with approval. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted to one of collective respect and recognition. Ms. Emily Carter, who had been one of the first to engage in conversation about the note, approached Mr. Sinclair. "I commend you for your actions. It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong and to make things right. Your gesture will have a lasting impact." The comments of approval and the positive reactions from fellow passengers created a ripple effect throughout the cabin. The mood, once tense and uncomfortable, had transformed into one of solidarity and mutual respect. Passengers began to share stories and experiences, and discussions about the themes of sacrifice and respect became the focal point of conversation. Flight attendants, too, were visibly pleased with the outcome. They had witnessed the change in attitude and the positive impact it had on the passengers. The gesture had not only resolved a contentious situation, but had also fostered a sense of community and understanding. As the flight continued, the interaction between Mr. Sinclair and Captain Johnson was marked by a newfound sense of camaraderie. They engaged in polite conversation, with Mr. Sinclair expressing genuine interest in Captain Johnson's experiences and perspectives. The initial discomfort had given way to a respectful dialogue, and the flight became a microcosm of the broader lessons conveyed in the note. By the time the aircraft began its descent, the effects of Mr. Sinclair's decision were evident. The flight had been transformed from a routine journey into a meaningful experience, marked by reflections on respect, sacrifice, and the power of acknowledging one's mistakes. The unexpected gesture had not only changed the course of the flight, but had also left a lasting impression on everyone involved. Conversations and reflections. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere in first class was markedly different from when Captain Layla Johnson had first boarded. The cabin, once a haven of detached luxury, had transformed into a space of genuine connection and introspection. Captain Johnson and Mr. Robert Sinclair, now seated in the comfort of first class, found themselves engaging in a conversation that would leave a profound impact on both of them. Captain Johnson, now settled into a seat, glanced over at Mr. Sinclair with a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. The earlier gesture had set the stage for a conversation that she hoped would be both meaningful and enlightening. "Mr. Sinclair," Captain Johnson began, her tone warm yet professional, "I appreciate the change in seating. It's not just about the comfort, but also about the acknowledgement of service that your gesture represents." Mr. Sinclair, his demeanor softened by genuine reflection, nodded in agreement. "Captain Johnson, I owe you an apology. Your letter opened my eyes to how I've taken things for granted, and how I've let my own biases cloud my judgment. I'd like to hear more about your experiences and what it means to serve." Captain Johnson smiled, grateful for the opportunity to share her perspective. Serving in the military has been both challenging and rewarding. It's about more than just duty. It's about making sacrifices for something greater than oneself. When I think about my service, I think about the camaraderie, the challenges, and the sense of purpose. It's a life that demands a lot but gives back in ways that are hard to quantify. The conversation flowed naturally as Captain Johnson and Mr. Sinclair delved into their personal stories. Captain Johnson recounted some of her most memorable experiences, including her deployment to conflict zones, the moments of camaraderie with her fellow soldiers, and the sacrifices she had made to serve her country. Her stories were filled with both pride and a sense of solemn duty. Mr. Sinclair listened intently, his initial skepticism giving way to a deeper understanding. "I never fully appreciated the extent of the sacrifices made by those who serve. Hearing your stories makes me realize just how much I've taken my own privileges for granted." The dialogue continued as Mr. Sinclair shared some of his own experiences and reflections. He spoke about his rise in the business world, the challenges he had faced, and the moments of success that had shaped his career. However, he also admitted to his own failings and the moments when he had let his privilege cloud his judgment. "I've been fortunate in many ways," Mr. Sinclair said, "but I've also made mistakes and allowed my success to make me complacent. Your letter made me confront some uncomfortable truths about myself." The exchange of stories between Captain Johnson and Mr. Sinclair became a bridge of mutual understanding. As they shared their experiences, they found common ground in their commitment to personal growth and respect for others. Their conversation highlighted the importance of acknowledging one's biases and the value of genuine dialogue in overcoming them. The impact of their conversation extended beyond that individual exchange. Other passengers in first class, who had been quietly observing, began to engage in their own discussions. The themes of respect, service, and personal growth became the focal point of conversations throughout the cabin. Ms. Emily Carter, who had previously praised Mr. Sinclair's gesture, found herself inspired by the ongoing dialogue. She joined Captain Johnson and Mr. Sinclair in their conversation, adding her own insights about the importance of empathy and understanding. "It's remarkable how a single gesture can lead to such meaningful discussions," she said. "It's a reminder of how important it is to be aware of our own biases and to appreciate the contributions of others." As the conversation continued, other passengers joined in, sharing their own stories and reflections. The flight attendants, too, noticed the positive shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The discussions about equality and appreciation for service members created a sense of camaraderie among the passengers. The broader impact of the conversation became evident as the flight progressed. The discussions sparked by Captain Johnson's letter and Mr. Sinclair's subsequent actions contributed to a more inclusive and reflective environment. The passengers began to see the value in recognizing and addressing their own biases, and the flight became a microcosm of the broader societal changes that were being discussed. For Mr. Sinclair, the experience was transformative. The conversation with Captain Johnson had not only altered his perspective, but had also inspired him to make tangible changes in his life. He resolved to use his influence and resources to support veterans and active military personnel. He began to explore ways to contribute to organizations that supported service members and their families. "I've learned a lot from this experience," Mr. Sinclair said to Captain Johnson. "I want to ensure that my actions moving forward reflect a deeper respect and understanding. It's not just about making amends, it's about committing to a broader sense of responsibility." Captain Johnson appreciated Mr. Sinclair's sincerity and commitment to change. "It's encouraging to see someone take such a profound step toward growth. Your willingness to confront your own biases and make a positive impact is commendable." As the plane prepared for its descent, the conversation between Captain Johnson and Mr. Sinclair continued, marked by a newfound sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. The flight had become more than just a journey. It had become a catalyst for personal growth and a reminder of the power of empathy and understanding. The reflections and discussions that took place during the flight left a lasting impression on all involved. The unexpected gesture of kindness had sparked a broader dialogue about respect and equality, highlighting the importance of acknowledging and addressing one's biases. The experience had shown that even small actions could lead to significant and meaningful changes, both in individuals and in the broader community. Conclusion and legacy. As the flight approached its final destination, Captain Layla Johnson found herself reflecting deeply on the journey she had just experienced. Her thoughts were a blend of gratitude, introspection, and a profound appreciation for the unexpected turn of events. The initial discomfort she had felt was now replaced with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her message had sparked meaningful change. Captain Johnson gazed out of the airplane window, watching as the sprawling cityscape came into view. The clouds beneath her seemed to symbolize a moment of clarity and realization. The conversation with Mr. Sinclair had not only altered his perspective, but had also reinforced her belief in the importance of service and the power of compassion. Her experiences in the military had always been about more than just duty. They were about fostering a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by those who serve. Her thoughts drifted back to the note she had written, the simple piece of paper that had set in motion a series of events. The note had been a reflection of her experiences, but it had also become a conduit for change. As she considered the impact of Mr. Sinclair's actions, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her service was validated not just by the medals she had earned, but by the genuine respect and understanding that her message had inspired. Mr. Sinclair, now visibly changed by the experience, had committed himself to making a difference. In the days following the flight, he took several concrete steps to support veterans and promote equality. He publicly acknowledged the impact of Captain Johnson's letter through a heartfelt statement in the media, where he expressed his regret for his previous actions and his commitment to fostering greater respect for service members. "Captain Johnson's letter was a wake-up call for me," Mr. Sinclair stated in his public address. "It's easy to become blind to the struggles and sacrifices of others when you're focused on your own success. I am committed to using my resources and influence to support organizations that assist veterans and to promote equality in all aspects of my life." Mr. Sinclair also made substantial charitable contributions to several veteran support organizations, including funding programs for mental health services and educational scholarships for veterans and their families. His actions were not just about making amends, but about actively working to address the issues highlighted by Captain Johnson's letter. The transformation in his approach to life and his dedication to making a positive impact became a testament to the power of reflection and growth. The ripple effect of this event extended beyond Mr. Sinclair's personal actions. The discussions and reflections sparked by the note had fostered a greater appreciation for service members among other passengers on the flight. Many had been inspired by the dialogue that unfolded in first class and took the opportunity to learn more about the challenges faced by those who serve their country. Ms. Emily Carter, who had been one of the passengers deeply affected by the conversations, shared her own reflections in a blog post. Her piece highlighted the importance of acknowledging and addressing biases, and it encouraged readers to support veterans and contribute to meaningful causes. Her post resonated with a wide audience, further amplifying the message of respect and appreciation for service members. The flight had become more than just a journey. It had been a transformative experience for all involved. The impact of Captain Johnson's letter and Mr. Sinclair's subsequent actions had created a lasting legacy. The simple act of a note had sparked a chain reaction that led to greater understanding, personal growth, and a renewed commitment to respect and equality. As the plane touched down and the passengers prepared to disembark, there was a sense of collective reflection and gratitude. The flight had been a reminder of the power of a single act of courage and understanding to effect change. The experience had demonstrated that even small actions could lead to significant and meaningful transformations in individuals and communities. Captain Johnson and Mr. Sinclair exchanged final words of appreciation as they left the plane. Their interaction had come full circle, from a moment of conflict to a place of mutual respect and understanding. The journey had been a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the ability to effect change through empathy and reflection. In the end, the story of Captain Layla Johnson and Mr. Robert Sinclair became a powerful reminder of the impact that one person's actions can have on others. It highlighted the importance of acknowledging the sacrifices made by those who serve and the potential for personal growth through self-reflection and understanding. The legacy of their encounter would continue to inspire others to embrace empathy, respect, and a commitment to making a positive difference in the world.